Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight for Remembering Resistance. I am Naomi Ostwald Kawamura, Executive Director of Densho. We are here today broadcasting live from Los Angeles' Little Tokyo on the lands of the Gabrielino, Tongva, and Chumash peoples. The Japanese American story of forced removal and incarceration unfolded on lands that were already home to indigenous peoples who have cared for and stewarded this land for millennia. For me, remembering these as connected histories grounds Densho's work in something larger, within a continuing pursuit of justice that links communities across time and place. Densho is a digital archive and public history organization whose mission is to preserve and share the history of Japanese American incarceration during World War II, not as a static chapter of the past, but as a living history that helps us build a more just and compassionate future. This evening will center on remembering hope and action. The Redress Movement is a history of both resistance and resilience. Without this movement, the history of the incarceration would likely have been told very differently. And because of this movement, it gave voice to the people who lived it, highlighting the importance of first-person testimony to understanding injustice. This legacy continues through Densho's oral history program and our evolving work. From safeguarding our historical archives, expanding digital access so that students, teachers, journalists, and storytellers continue to have trustworthy resources at a time when facts are becoming distorted. And we are deepening our educational initiatives and community engagement efforts to ensure that this history continues to reach new generations. Remembering the Redress Movement reminds us that the work of justice requires truth, courage, and collective action, transforming remembrance into responsibility and responsibility into change. Right now, we're living through a time when democracy is under pressure, when historical erasure and misinformation threaten our shared commitments to truth. Densho is meeting this moment by protecting this history to ensure it isn't erased, distorted, or forgotten. We're also working to activate this history so that it is resonant and relevant to today, so that it may continue to inform the world we are building together now. Of course, this work is only possible because of people like you. So as you listen tonight, I hope you'll be inspired to support Densho. You can donate today through Densho's website or by pressing the donate button below your video screen. Your support will help us preserve these stories, elevate new voices, and continue linking history to the work of justice today. As we move into tonight's program, I hope you'll listen not only for history, but for hope, the kind of hope that the Redress Movement made possible, and a hope that continues to guide Densho's work today. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Densho's Senior Development and Communications Manager, Jen Noji, who will share more about tonight's program. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Naomi, for the warm welcome and introduction, and thank you, all of you tuning in for being here tonight. As Naomi mentioned, I'm Jen Noji, and I'm super excited to be serving as the moderator for our program. So what you can expect tonight is we'll start with a poetry reading from one of our guest speakers, Traci Kato-Kiriyama, and after that reading, we'll transition into a speaker panel. And we'll actually briefly interrupt that panel to show you a short video of the CWRIC hearings in which Japanese American former incarcerees and descendants testified, many for the first time, about their experiences during World War II. And then after that video, we'll transition back into the speaker panel, which will be followed by a Q&A session in which all of you can ask questions. So please do make note of any questions that come to mind throughout the program, which you can ask to our speakers. Before we begin, I just wanted to review some quick technical points. First, for your chat, to open and close the chat window, please click the chat icon, which is in the top right corner of your video screen. And also, if you'd like to view subtitles for tonight's event, you can do so by accessing the closed captioning, which you can see a small CC button located beside the volume button at the bottom of your video screen. And then if you have any technical issues at all, please feel free to let us know in the chat, or you can email us at info@densho.org. Now, It's my great pleasure to introduce Traci Kato-Kiriyama, an award-winning artist who is recognized for their work as a writer, performer, theater deviser, cultural producer, community organizer, and audiobook narrator. To offer some highlights about Traci, she is a performer and principal writer of Pull Project Ensemble, two-time NET recipient, and an NEFA awardee for her show, Tales of Clamor. Traci is also a co-chair of the National Nikkei Reparations Coalition and a core organizer with Nikkei Progressives and NCRR. And she's the director and co-founder of Tuesday Night Project, which presents the Tuesday Night Cafe series, which is the longest-running Asian American free public art series in the country. Traci is also the author of various publications, including their most recent book, Navigating Without Instruments, from which she will read today. And you can find a longer bio of Traci, as well as all of our speakers, on the bottom of the event page below your video screen. So please do check out their biographies, and you can also learn more about Traci's work on her personal website. And with that, I'll turn things over to Traci.
Thank you, Jen. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Densho. It's an honor to be here tonight with all of you. I'm going to read 3 pieces and just say a couple words of support for Densho in between. So, this first piece is called Fire Near Fire. Whenever we talk in community about Manzanar or Thule or internment or American concentration camps, we often hear about the dust, the irrigation by the hands of the Japanese farmer, the bitter winds, the dances and bands, soldiers and baseball. We discuss so little on the factions and fights between the incarcerees and those they called dogs for turning inward to police their own, or the resistance behind the riots and the bullets that hooked into the runners who tried to pass over barbed wire hurdles, or the old men losing their minds and monthly earnings in gambling circles from one block to the next, or the queer lovers hiding, or the queer lovers contributing, or the queer lovers loving, or the girls who screamed and winced naked outside of 1,000 eyes from the stockade at Thule Lake. We never speak much, enough, or at all about the fire. This next piece I wrote for my grandpa, and it is dedicated to all ancestors who died before knowing that redress and reparations would be a thing to come or to be fought for in the future we call now. No redress, no museum, no monument, no poem, no song can house the spirit of a past soul like that of my grandfather, who died before justice could meet the old man at his mailbox. Grandpa never got to stand in line at the bank, 3 inches taller, with redress check in hand, 1 foot in front of the other, feeling grounded again. Never got to deposit an apology in his savings account. Never got to wonder of how he might spend this money, on new equipment for the nursery, or a truck for himself, or college money for his grandchildren, or for once take the most takai cuts from the fish truck man. Most years in April, I attend pilgrimage. I say, hello, Manzanar. I bow at the graves. I speak to the wind of my hopes for afterlife to be a real thing. Not so I can see Grandpa again, but for him to look around today, jump into the circle, dance the tankobushi and watch me get it right, and see our friends, all our relations, learn what we mean by chosen family. We are here. Not only to remember, but to remind the local docents this place will never be a museum. this body will never forget. And we leave pilgrimage with pledges as concrete as the monument. We sing songs to keep each other awake on the long ride home. We lose sight quickly. Rearview mirrors, a pitch black sky. When they close the gate at the hour they have had enough of us. Where we leave behind parts of our best poetry. Where I hope not, but think Grandpa sits still, waiting. So I'm so happy to be here to read a couple things. I'm going to read an excerpt in a minute, but I wanted to just take a moment to just give my enthusiastic support and love for Densho. You know, when I write and get to share poetry aloud, I feel I'm calling my grandpa, in this case, and ancestors into the room. And I think about like all the work it took to excavate these stories, excavate memory, and to sort of in my own way let our ancestors know that we're still going because of them and because of the future, right? That we're here because of them as well. So I feel a responsibility, and as an artist, as a writer, you know, as educators, we do so much research to write a line, to write one verse. And I go to Densho all the time. And I think the thing I think about a lot is that I am not entitled. I'm not entitled to Densho. I am beholden to Densho. I am indebted to Densho. So I want to just give that kind of shout out and extra support every year, every month if possible, to this amazing organization. So I'm just going to read an excerpt of a longer piece in my book, and it's called NTNC on Reparations, or Note to Nikkei Community on Reparations, as guided by legacy organizations, organizers, scholars, and other leaders of Black communities steering the movement to reckon with the harms of slavery, Jim Crow, and pervasive systems, policies, and institutions of racism that still thrive today. As a person who wasn't incarcerated, but as a child and grandchild of those incarcerated at Manzanar and Tule Lake, I learned when I was a kid that there was once a time before camp reunions and pilgrimages and monuments and former American concentration camps gaining the designation of National Historic Sites. Let us always remember the government did not give us any of it. We had to go out and excavate our own memories. We had to find our history and fight for the revelation of our narratives. They meant to lock up the camps and all evidence and have us go on without acknowledging the pain of our existence, without justice, without healing. That was not possible. Our Sansei generation had to find out who they were in order to move forward, and they uncovered history, and they unlocked a reckoning. We are not the moral authority on mass incarceration, mass removal, or collective infliction of oppression onto one community. We are linked to a larger cycle of struggle and also a legacy of resistance and solidarity. We have stood up to white supremacy time and again. Let our lessons learned from Redress and Reparations for Japanese Americans serve to remind us that we were once told it was impossible, that it would never happen, that it was part of what happens at a time of war, or that the camps were not even that bad, or it was necessary and good for us. Let us remember that leadership came from within and had the solidarity of countless other people and communities in order for justice to come to fruition. Let us remember we demanded the respect of being able to lead our own movement. Let us not only support reparations because we once won a battle for redress. Let us do it because it is the right thing to do, because it is an imperative toward healing, because we are being called upon, because in our deepest core, we know we must say yes in order for the healing of all. Let us remember we will never truly breathe whole breaths as whole beings, as a whole country and people, until we reach a collective reckoning and repair, until we become whole and so can exhale into a place of healing at the depths of the blood and marrow in our bones. Imagine that breath. Okay, I'll stop right there. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Traci, for your really, really powerful words and the many, many messages they carry. I think, your reading sets a really nice foundation for our discussion tonight and starts to really make clear, why we are talking about the redress movement tonight. And that's because it's part of the incarceration story. And in many ways, the work that you all did and that the Japanese American community and others did during the redress movement really shaped the narrative and the history of the incarceration as we understand it today. So thank you very much. And with that, I'll actually transition into our speaker panel, which brings together 3 really inspiring community leaders with unique perspectives and relationships to the redress movement and to the Japanese American community more broadly. Our speakers tonight, of course, include Traci, whom we just heard from, as well as Kathy Masaoka and Don Tamaki, who we are so excited to have you here as well. To say a little bit about them before we begin, Kathy Masaoka is a retired teacher, lifelong activist, and founding member of the National Coalition for Redress and Reparations, now called Nikkei for Civil Rights and Redress, or NCRR. Kathy was born and raised in multicultural Boyle Heights and came of age during the late 1960s at the height of the Vietnam War and the dawn of the Asian American Studies movement at UC Berkeley and elsewhere. Since 1971, Kathy has worked on issues related to youth, worker rights, housing in Little Tokyo, and of course, redress for Japanese Americans. She is currently a co-chair of NCRR and served on the editorial team for the book, NCRR, The Grassroots Struggle for Japanese American Redress and Reparations, which we actually have on our table right here. And Kathy continues to be involved in community organizing through Nikkei Progressives, NCRR, and other groups fighting for immigrant rights, reparations for Black Americans, and other causes. I am also excited to welcome Don Tamaki, a longtime community and social justice lawyer. Don is a senior counsel at the San Francisco law firm of Minami Tamaki LLP, having received his BA and JD from UC Berkeley. In the 1980s, Don was a member of the pro bono legal team that reopened the landmark 1944 Supreme Court case of Fred Korematsu, overturning Mr. Korematsu's criminal conviction for defying the incarceration orders. In 2021, Don was appointed to serve on the 9-member California Reparations Task Force, which studied and documented the vast impact of enslavement, Jim Crow oppression, and segregation, ultimately offering recommendations to the legislature for what California should do to address these compounding harms. Don is also part of the leadership team of the Alliance for Reparations, Reconciliation, and Truth, or ARRT, a multiracial statewide coalition working to raise awareness about the California Task Force's findings and to transform its recommendations into legislation. I'm also happy to share briefly that Kathy and Don both did oral history interviews with Densho, which we are super grateful for, and you can find them in the Densho digital repository. And as mentioned, you can find more info about all of our speakers in the speaker bios on this same webpage below your video screen. So thank you so much, Traci, Kathy, and Don, for being here with us tonight. I have so much that I want to ask you, but for everyone watching, I did want to give a really quick overview of the redress movement, what it was and what it entailed, before turning things over to all of you. So when we're talking about the redress movement, we're really referring to a decades-long struggle in the late 1970s and 1980s in which Japanese Americans demanded justice for the many vast harms and trauma caused by the World War II incarceration. And this movement was led largely by sansei, specifically many children of former incarcerees. And through the vast and collective efforts of many people and organizations, Japanese Americans were actually able to win redress and reparations in 1988 through the Civil Liberties Act, which included, a government apology as well as monetary reparations to living former incarcerees, as well as an education fund. Today we'll be focusing on just a couple of key aspects of the redress movement, including, the really vast efforts of grassroots organizers and activists who were in large part inspired by other civil rights movement leaders at the time. Plus, we'll be exploring some legal dimensions of the redress movement, including the creation of public hearings for former incarcerees and descendants to testify about their wartime experiences, as well as the Coram Nobis cases, which challenged and ultimately overturned the false legal foundations used to justify the World War II incarceration. With that brief overview, I'll turn things over to our speakers, and I actually wanted to ask you, Kathy and Dawn, to begin by just sharing, a little bit about your role during the redress movement.
Thank you, Jen, and Densho. I'd like to give a little context first to the people that were involved in the Redress and Reparations movement, because many of us that were involved in NCRR, National Coalition for Redress and Reparations, actually came out of the Asian American movement of the late 60s and the early 70s. We had learned from and benefited from the leadership of the Civil Rights Movement. We were energized and strengthened by our connections and realization that we were part of communities of color and part of the third world, not only in the US, but also globally. This was a time of the Vietnam War, and when Sansei GIs were coming back, they're telling us stories about how they were treated and how they were singled out and identified as, this is an example of what a gook looks like. And so I think we started to realize as younger people in this country, that Asian Americans, that we were probably seen in the same way as less than human. We didn't know about the camps. We didn't know that our families had been incarcerated and had been treated in a similar fashion as that. But many of us returned to our communities and began creating programs that was serving the first generation Issei, many of them living in the hotels in Little Tokyo by themselves. Our young people were overdosing on drugs because of their whole identity issues that we also understood. They didn't like who they were. They didn't feel good about themselves. And we started to also learn and work with other sectors in our community, working people, small businesses, and organize to fight the redevelopment of our communities, both here in LA, San Francisco, San Jose, all over California. We were fighting the redevelopment that was going to destroy our communities and even make it smaller than it already was. We knew that we had been removed from the community during World War II and that the city had taken parts of Little Tokyo. And so this was a fight that we really learned a lot from. So from that, we carried these experiences into the Redress and Reparations movement. So NCRR joined with JCL in terms of fighting a legislative battle, which was seeking a bill that would provide reparations for the incarceration. It would include monetary reparations, as Jan mentioned, a community fund. We were fighting for a community fund, education. Education was really important, an apology, and also hoping that we could overturn the basis for the camps. NCRR had many chapters in California. We had chapters in San Jose, San Diego, LA, Sacramento, and we all were similarly had come out of different fights, and so we carried that with us. But I like to think that NCRR really attracted kind of different kinds of people. We believed in the grassroots. So many people gravitated to NCRR that were not necessarily part of their mainstream organizations. People like Jim Saito, the meter reader, who fought the LADWP over an injustice that he believed they had wronged him. like Tom Shiroishi, the truck driver, who wrote eloquent letters to the Rafu when he disagreed with something. And he had been jailed actually by jumping the fence at Santa Anita. Like Lily Okamoto, who was one of the leaders of the Tokyo Towers, and continued to be a lifelong learner, played tennis into her 70s, and also was host mistress. She liked to talk about how, the speaking and all of that, she continued to train herself. And also, of course, Frank Emmy, who was a leader of the Fair Play Committee at Heart Mountain and a draft resistor, and many, many more. I was fortunate to work with all of these Nisei in intergenerational teams. We went out to different organizations and churches to speak about the incarceration and their experiences, passed out flyers together, had tables in Japanese Village Plaza, and I was always part of that outreach committee that was able to interact and learn from people like the Nisei and other people in our community. So that was kind of the role that I played. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Yeah, Don, could you tell us a little bit about your experience?
Well, let me give you a background on the legal issue. As everybody knows, 125,000 people by the end of September, say October of 1942, were incarcerated in 10 concentration camps from California to Arkansas. But there were pockets of resistance, and 3 of those were Fred Korematsu, living in the Bay Area, Gordon Hirabayashi, a student at the University of Washington, and Minoru Yasui, a young lawyer in Portland, Oregon. They all felt that the jailing of themselves and their community was wrong. They had done no wrong. They did not deserve to be taken away. And they resisted basically people being forced out of their homes at gunpoint and literally rounded up. So they refused to obey. The government then prosecuted them each in separate jurisdictions, and they made the following argument, that Japanese Americans were engaging in spying, and that is to say shore-to-ship signaling, and then secondly, they were so unassimilated and unassimilable that they were prone to disloyalty. They were so different, they could never be Americans. And on that basis, those cases wound their way up to the US Supreme Court. And in 1943 and 1944, and bear in mind, an entire racial population had been removed. Many had lost their property, their businesses, and some even their lives. And the court in the 1943 and 44 ruled against them to their surprise and dismay. That principle stood for the next 37 years. And it stands for the principle that without trial, without due process, without justice of any kind, men, women, and children, the young and the old, the healthy and the infirm could be, put in concentration camps for no other reason than they happened to look like the enemy. A very dangerous precedent. In the dissent in Korematsu, Robert Jackson explained, the principle lies around like a loaded weapon ready for the hand of any authority who could put forth a plausible claim of an urgent need. As I'm sure the audience realizes, regrettably, that sort of prescient statement is more relevant today than probably it was, when we reopened these cases. 37 years later, Peter Irons, Aiko Yoshinaga Herzog, they don't know each other. They meet each other in Washington, D.C. Aiko works for the commission that you talked about. Peter Irons is looking to write a book about Fred. Cannot find Fred Korematsu's Justice Department files in the archives. Looking around, and he finally discovers that they've been misfiled. His FBI file, his Justice Department file, in the Commerce Department, and basically forgotten for almost 40 years. Aiko works for the commission, she's a researcher, and she begins to uncover in a separate tranche of documents facts that had not seen the light of day. The government had argued that Japanese Americans were spying and that they were committing acts of disloyalty. There was only one thing wrong with that. It was entirely made up, and none of it was true. And among the documents 37 years later that was found were reports from every intelligence agency responsible for overseeing the so-called Japanese American national security threat. There were reports from J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI, saying that we've investigated every single claim of shore-to-ship signaling. None of it is true. There were a report from the Federal Communications Commission that said General DeWitt's men, the general that led the rounding up, can barely read 10 words a minute. They pick up signals emanating from Tokyo and calling them shore-to-ship transmissions. It's pathetic, to say the least, he wrote. The Navy had said, we've completed a 2-year study even before the war broke out and have concluded that the vast majority of Japanese Americans are loyal to this country and they should be treated no differently than the German and Italian populations. So whistleblowers within the Justice Department wrote to the Assistant Attorney General, to the Attorney General of the United States, saying we're about to tell lies to the US Supreme Court. They were ignored. And so there were a number of attempts to alert the court of this intentional fraud that was being committed, and none of it succeeded. So Japanese Americans, of course, they knew they weren't spies. They knew they had done nothing wrong, but they didn't know the degree that they were victimized, to the point that at the highest echelons of our government, it was so important to uphold the constitutionality of these cases that Justice Department lawyers, Solicitor General of the United States, was willing to commit a fraud on the US Supreme Court. And our communities, our family, our community, were the subject of a scandal of epic proportions. And so ultimately we were able to reopen those cases. Gordon Hirabayashi, Min Yusui, and Fred Korematsu in particular. I worked on the Korematsu case, and his criminal conviction was thrown out because the government lied. None of that basis for the rounding up was true.
Yeah, thanks so much for that historical and legal context. I was just wondering if you could quickly say a little bit about how you think those legal cases, so overturning those convictions, actually played into the redress movement, and maybe the success of receiving redress and reparations for the community.
Well, this is really Kathy's doing NCRR and JCL and the other groups, but a movement was picking up speed. It was a 20-year process, almost 20 years. And the argument was that a great wrong had been committed. But their opponents argued that the US Supreme Court had ruled on this and found that Japanese Americans had committed wrongs where, it was unfortunate, it was a mistake, but nothing can be done. And after we revealed that the government knew it was wrong at the time, that the claims being made to justify the rounding up were false, categorically false. That led and boosted the movement that a great wrong had been committed and the government owed our community an apology and reparations. So it was very serendipitous. It was the alignment of the moon and the stars, but the legal effort sort of coincided with the political effort and the organizing effort to make a compelling argument before the public.
Yeah, thanks, Don. And another really interesting way that, again, the legal effort sort of coincided with some of the grassroots organizing work that you, Kathy, were talking about is actually the formation of these public commission hearings, right? So in response to demands made by Japanese Americans who were really demanding justice for the incarceration, Congress actually put together that commission, the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians, to investigate the harms as well as the causes, the real causes of the incarceration. And we actually wanted to show a short video of some testimonies that were given during those public hearings, which NCRR, so Kathy and others directly helped put together, and to mobilize the community. But before going into really the importance of those hearings, maybe we could just show you all a couple of segments from them.
My brother, as in regards to my brother James, who was killed in Manzanar, I have never been able to talk about this, but more people have come up to me and said I must speak out. My children, even my own children, don't know that my brother was shot in the back.
On December 7, 1941, we were the only Japanese American family in Kodiak, Alaska. In a short time, my father and two uncles were arrested and put in concentration camps in the United States. We were not told where they were sent. They lost all their property, their house, their boats, equipment, and everything. I have never seen my father since. I have been trying to find him, been trying to locate him. And what happened to him, I don't know, and have been unsuccessful so far. I am very bitter about this. I have not seen my father since I was 11 years old. I am now 51 years old. I have missed my father very much, and I wonder. I wonder if he's alive today.
That amongst my Japanese American friends and peers, there have been many early deaths. Besides my own brother and sister, among my close friends, I lost almost 1 out of 3. They were all people who had been in camp, and these people died very young of usually of cancer of the breast, cancer, different parts of the body. And I really feel that their deaths were premature and were due to the wartime evacuation, the stresses, not only during camp, but the adjustment to life afterwards.
On a personal basis, I sincerely appreciate what you've done. But we're not talking on a personal basis right now. So you're trying to hurry me, and I will not be hurried by you as a representative of this government ever.
Well,
now you want me to leave, you can tell me to leave.
no, I'm not telling. There's no point in getting.
Well, don't rush us.
No, I'm not trying to rush you. As a matter of fact, I think if
I've been rushed by this government enough.
Well, sir, I want to assure
If
you.
you didn't want this position, you volunteered for it.
Well,
I'm sorry. Now, wait a minute. Listen, I'm sorry. If we have outbursts like this, we're going to ask people to be removed.
We know how some people are.
Now, wait a second. There are some.
Just 2 days ago, as I observed these commission hearings in this same room, I sat near a group of Caucasian women who were obviously, for their own emotional reasons, against redress for Japanese Americans. I felt anxious and frightened as I realized that the kind of dedicated hatred these people felt towards us was the force that led to us spending so many years behind barbed wire. Feelings such as hate, bigotry, fear, humiliation prevent us from making wise and sane decisions about national policy that affects the lives of thousands.
The National Coalition for Redress and Reparation firmly believes that this commission should place the priority on correcting the injustice and to submit the following concrete solutions to Congress. First, we ask the continuing education of the public about the truth of this event so that the American people of today and in the future may learn from and not repeat past mistakes. Second, we ask the Commission to recommend whatever is necessary and appropriate to overturn the legal basis for the evacuation order so that no branch of government can arbitrarily strip away the freedom and civil liberties of any group of people. Third, we insist that the government include those of other races and nationalities who suffered similar unjust actions of the government, including the Aleutian, Pribilof Islanders, and Peruvians, in our pursuit of redress. Fourth, we ask for a community fund to help compensate for the sociological damages done by the evacuation. And most importantly, we strongly call for direct monetary compensation to each victim of the concentration camps or to their heirs who were affected by Executive Order 9066.
At the time of my birth, my mother's physician in camp performed a tubal ligation on her. She never gave her consent and was totally unaware of it until 10 years ago, when she was examined by her physician, an internist for colon cancer. She is not the only one who bears physical scars as a result of our incarceration. For over 35 years, I have been the stereotyped Japanese American. I kept quiet, hoping that in due time we will be justly compensated and recognized for our years of patient effort. By my passive attitude, I can reflect on my past years to conclude that it doesn't pay to remain silent. No one benefits when truth is silent. The bigots and uninformed demagogues and persecutors will become increasingly suppressive and abusive, attempting to diminish our characters through crude jokes and half-truths. I will be proud to be a Japanese, and I would want to be equally proud to be an American. I do hope my late father's ideals and expectations for this country will someday be realized. The redress we are seeking cannot return to us the years of unjustified imprisonment, emotional, mental, and physical hardships we endured, or any treasured possessions we were forced to sell or were stolen from us. Those in positions of power today who will be deciding the fate of this issue not only finalize it for us, but for every citizen, present and future, who could be subjected to collective punishment because of his race, creed, or national origin. The final judgment will affect all Americans, now and for all time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Wow, I am always extremely moved whenever I watch footage from the hearings. So thank you for watching those with us. Just before turning things back over to the speakers, I wanted to offer some brief context for what you just watched. So those were some segments from the hearings that took place in LA, but there were also hearings that took place in major cities throughout the US, which actually led to over 750 witnesses testifying. So, former incarcerees and descendants speaking out, really many for the first time. So I'm really curious to hear what you all have to say, or if you have any thoughts, reflections in response to that video. Though I quickly wanted to just shout out and really thank Visual Communications as well as NCRR for really thinking ahead, thinking about the really important historical significance of that event, and having the forethought to actually record those testimonies in LA. So really thank you, Visual Communications and NCRR, for collaborating to document those hearings in LA and for sharing them with Densho. We're super lucky to actually have those hearings in Densho's new digital library of Japanese American incarceration films, so please do check those out if you have a chance. But turning things back over to you, did you want to share any initial thoughts, reflections?
Okay, I'll start. I mean, I could say so much, as I know we all can, so I'll try to keep mine to like less than a minute. Seeing those hearings, I can watch them. I've watched them over and over and over. And every time I see them, it resonates, it hits in similar and different ways. And today in particular, I appreciate that you ended with Alice Nahida. The personal is political, the political is personal. I saw Alice every year at Christmas Eve. She was in our Calabash family circle. And to hear her say that no one benefits when the truth is silenced, I just think that that's just really resonating with me over and over. I have many other thoughts, but I'm holding that one right now.
When I see the hearings and I was at some, I was able to see some of it actually, and I testify also. But I'm just filled with pride for a lot of things. One is that NCRR played a role in terms of making it so that people could attend, having a bigger room, having translation for the first generation Issei, pushing for them to be able to testify in Japanese if they needed to, and having an extra room because an extra room was needed, so many people were there, and having an evening hearing at Little Tokyo Towers so that people who are working could actually come and testify and be there. So all of that, and then just proud of all the people that testified and spoke so honestly and clearly and eloquently. Most of us had never heard those stories before, and completely overwhelmed and pushed us to really be determined to fight for redress and reparation. Proud of Jim Masaoka, who banged his hand and our fists on the table, and who always said that if they had given us redress, just gave it to us, it would have meant nothing. It was the fighting and standing up for redress and speaking up that meant the most. So all of that, the hearings bring back to me the start of so much. It was like the moment that I think our community opened up, made a decision that we were going to speak out, stand up, and really fight.
Well, just a short comment. After the Supreme Court ruled against Fred Korematsu, Gordon Hirabayashi, and Minoru Yasui, basically Japanese Americans were left to, in many cases, return to the very communities that exiled them in the first place. So the message was, you lost, your status here is very conditional, keep your mouth shut. So literally, for the next 37 years, people did not talk about this. So when the hearings happened, even among communities and neighbors and fellow members of the community, they didn't know what each other had gone through. So when this, hearings took place, it really woke everybody up. And so in revealing this, of course, it helped the healing of our own community, but also taught the nation a lesson on the meaning of the Constitution and the consequences to democracy and everyone when those three branches of government, which are designed to be a check and balance on the other, completely fail. And so I'm glad the hearings illustrated the human side of the story. On the other hand, even the people testifying did not know the true extent of what had happened. And literally, on the legal side of it anyway, this was all accomplished by lies and fabrications. And that in turn led to the reopening of our cases.
Can I just add another thing? Okay, so the scene with Lillian Baker and grabbing the testimony from Jim Kawaminami and seeing, I always just think about Evelyn standing up and saying, you know, get her out, and didn't realize that everybody was shouting, get her out. I don't know why, but I realized that our whole community was shouting, get her out. And you know, that moment is also brings a lot of pride to me, because our community doesn't usually do that, you know. And so that was really, really great. And there's so many things to say about the hearings, but yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, I think it's so interesting to just be able to learn so much from those hearings. And, you know, hearing you all reflect on it really reminds me that those hearings really shaped, you know, community memory, but also public memory and the public mainstream discussions, discourse, you know, about the incarceration. They totally, I guess, just influence the way that the incarceration experiences, wartime experiences, and everything that happened afterward would be remembered and talked about for really, you know, decades and even now. But I do just also want to be mindful of the time and transition a little bit into thinking about your own work. So you all have been really active, you know, in so many different ways in the community, in organizing, and in working with other groups as well. So I just wanted to ask you if you could, you know, share a little bit about how you think the Japanese American Redress Movement connects to some other movements for justice, including movements or initiatives in which you are involved.
You're looking at me as if I better talk. Well, I did serve, rewind a little bit. On May 25th, 2020, of course, George Floyd was murdered, captured on 9 minutes and 29 seconds of excruciating video. And it led to, at that time, the largest protests in US history. And within 4 months, California passed a commission, a task force to study the 400-year history beginning with enslavement, another 246 years of enslavement, another 100 years of Jim Crow exclusion, and decade after decade more of segregation leading to today's outcomes. And I was one of 9 members appointed to that, and it changed my thinking of our own incarceration. I thought typically of the Japanese American Roundup as kind of an example of anti-Asian hate, and the origins of that was 1942 or maybe 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act. But after doing this deep dive into this pretty unknown history, everybody on that task force, although steeped in history and considered themselves knowledgeable, we all learned something. And now I realize that this racial pathology that it ended up and targeted our community didn't start in 1942. It started in 1619. And that is the values and sort of the ideology that was necessary to prop up the institution of slavery and Jim Crow and everything else, simply morphed after the end of the Civil War and into most of the 20th century. So by the time Japanese Americans arrived in California and the West Coast, late 1800s, early 1900s, California was pretty much a Jim Crow state. It entered the Union in 1850 as a non-slave state, but it was so complicit with slavery and separation. And, you know, there were sizable Klan chapters in Los Angeles, in San Francisco, in Oakland, Riverside, Fresno, up and down the state, and that's the environment that our ancestors parachuted into. So when the Roundup happened in 1942, you know, when you could treat and subjugate an entire population into property, the removal of Japanese Americans was so normal and so acceptable and so logical, nobody questioned it. And so what we're talking about is sort of a continuum of pathology. And so I look at the Japanese American incarceration experience as a subchapter in a racial pathology. It really began long before we arrived on these shores. And until that is identified, and reparations does that, and until we reckon with that, it just continues to recycle. And we're seeing that, obviously, and today it's expanded and it morphs and it picks up conveniently new targets. But this exclusion and othering is a very old part of American history and part of our culture.
Yeah. Well, I really want to thank Dawn for being on the commission, on the California Task Force, and for doing the work, and for the task force producing that 1,000-page report. We learned a lot in the community, NCRR and UK Progressives, about the history. And as you know, I agree with Don totally. We think we know history, but there's so much to know. And that knowledge makes you rethink everything else that you thought you knew or you believed in. And you know, one of the things I keep hearing people say is that the camps were a mistake. Obviously, they were not a mistake. They were intentional. They knew it wasn't necessary, and so it just continued. It was done for a very specific reason. Even the thing about failure of political leadership as being one of the reasons the commission came out with, it really wasn't a failure. It was very intentional. It was clearly the leadership's purpose to incarcerate the Japanese Americans. So, you know, I've just learned a lot, and I learned that also what reparations really means in terms of you know, for our community, for African Americans, for Black reparations, and you know, the whole thing about cessation of a wrong too, so that non-repetition. It means that it can never happen again, and we talk about never happening again. It will happen over and over and over again until the root of it is dealt with. And I think for many of us, working on reparations, Black reparations for the Black community, is something that we feel is sort of the essential, basic, foundational change that has to occur.
And it is happening again. It is already happening, right? And it's never stopped. And even before 1619, the destruction and genocide of indigenous communities, right? I think that it's the way this this country does, and it's foundational, it's structural, right? So I think the fight is on many fronts, and we're all connected, right? So, but I know it's getting late.
Well, we still do have a Q&A session that will continue for 15 minutes after the hour. And I do really want to dive into some of your work in more detail during that Q&A session. But I think one thing that I just wanted to pick up on, a thread that I'm hearing, is that really seeing the incarceration as part of a longer history, right, of racial subjugation, oppression, but then also thinking about the ways that we all are trying to intervene in the way that history is told, and the sort of the stories we tell about the past and the present. And at Densho, we really try very hard to really be responsible in the way that we are preserving and sharing history as a steward. Like, we really do want to, we feel it is a responsibility to do this in a mindful and ethical way. And I was just wondering, Kathy and Dawn, we're so lucky to have had you actually record oral histories with Densho. And I was just wondering if you could say, a quick remark or any thoughts about, why you did that or why you think Densho's work is important.
Kathy.
I was honored actually to have Densho want to have an interview, because there are so many people that need to be interviewed. And but I do also feel that the reparations movement was something that is very important. And we're third generation, came out of the Asian American movement, and there was a lot of work done in the community. We know that people came before us too, and that's part of learning the history of others that were doing the same thing, but building solidarity with other communities. So I feel like I'm part of that continuum, and I think that Densho does that. They preserve these stories. They show us that we are not just one part of history, but we're connected to other people in our communities, to what they've done before, and to other peoples. And I think that broadens our picture of the world, and it makes us realize maybe what our responsibility is to do, what we have to do. And there's so many stories that haven't been have not been actually recorded and are really a loss, and that's a big regret. You know, all of the Issei men that had no families, no one to hear their stories, no one to know about them, and you know, so I think that it's really important, and I'm probably the worst culprit for not really hearing people's stories enough, but I think that Densho really does a great job in doing that.
Well, just to echo, you know, what Kathy said, the role of history and who remembers it and how it's dictated is critical. So on the one hand, I mean, Densho is of its own worth because it preserves our history, it preserves the nation's history. But it's certainly more than historical memory and a curiosity. It has enormous relevance today, as I think most people in the audience realizes. 37 states have either passed or proposed laws regulating how teachers teach history. And in some cases, take Florida, has made it unlawful for teaching of woke DEI that would make a student feel uncomfortable or less proud of being an American. And ultimately, when that happens, we're talking about banning books, censoring curriculums, going after the Smithsonian Museum to dismantle its displays on slavery in America. And every museum and every receptacle of history, colleges, universities now are facing that dilemma. And what we're seeing is you know, the undermining of democracy. And the way institutions get hollowed out is you destroy memory and you replace facts with fabrications. And Japanese Americans know that story. They were victimized by that story. And the outcomes were dire, not only for Japanese Americans, but for the public generally. And that's really, who better to speak out about that than Japanese Americans? We know that history. And so Densho, preserving that is doing more than just, you know, lodging memory. It's really quite relevant today. I'm a big fan of Densho. I'm a donor. I have skin in the game, and so I wouldn't ask people to support an institution if I wasn't behind it myself. And I just think it plays a critical role at a very, very dangerous time. The house is on fire. And for that reason alone, we value and need Densho, and we need other museums to continue that effort and to stand tall against what is happening.
Well, thank you so much, and I know that we are slightly over the hour, so thank you all for, you know, sticking with us. But yeah, thank you really for, I think, so eloquently capturing what we really try to do at Densho. And it's really because of people like you, your support, and everyone watching. It's thanks to our dedicated community, our supporters, that we are able to do this work. So thank you all. And we do have a 15-minute Q&A session coming up in just a moment. But for folks who do need to hop off, I just wanted to say some quick remarks. So really first, I'm so grateful to our speakers. So thank you so much for being here, for sharing your experiences, stories, and insight with us. And you know, I know we still have the Q&A session, but thank you so much for the discussion so far. And thank you all of you for being here and tuning in. You know, this is a fundraiser, and we appreciate all of the donations that you have already made. And you know, if you wanted to make any final gifts before the end of this program, you can do so by pressing the donate button below your video on this same page. But thank you. It's really thanks to, again, your support that we're able to continue to really protect this history, to make sure that even as it's threatened in various ways, you know, Densho will stand strong and just keep being an archive, but also keep being an educational resource for everyone for generations to come. So we are going to transition now into the Q&A. This is an opportunity for all of you watching to actually submit questions. So you can do that by, putting questions in the chat for us. And then one of my colleagues will actually feed me the questions, and I can ask this, and I'll share those with the speakers. Though actually, I wanted to really quickly, before the Q&A, I wanted to just give a few more thanks to some people. And I'm sorry that I didn't do this a moment ago, but I really wanted to thank the Little Tokyo Community Council and Nikkei Progressives for letting us use this space to broad stream this program to all of you. And a huge, huge thank you to Under One Groove Entertainment for making this event possible by actually, allowing us to live stream the event. And also, again, a big thank you to Visual Communications and NCRR for recording and preserving those CWRIC hearings that we watched earlier in the program. And then also a thank you to Costco, who is a sponsor of this program. But really, it's thanks to everyone here, the community itself, that we're able to do this work. But with that, I will now transition into the Q&A session. And I see some questions are coming in. And so, again, you can submit the questions through the chat. And we also had some questions come in through our info@densho.org account. So I actually just wanted to start with this question. And y'all were starting to, really get a chance to talk about your work now in support of, for example, Black reparations and other, reparations for other groups. And I was just wondering what you've learned from doing that work in support of other communities seeking justice. Have you thought about the Japanese American Redress Movement in any new ways? Or do you have any lessons or takeaways from the work that you're doing now?
I know we never thought that we were going to be advising people just because we had gone through fighting for Japanese American redress that somehow we had any answers. And surprisingly, actually, we learned so much by being involved from the movement now. And I think reflecting on that is that, maybe it's me. I thought, we won reparation, it's over, it's done with, we're going to move on. But not understanding the whole thing about, again, I want to talk about the cessation. It's like, will this ever happen again? I thought it would never happen again. This is how naive I was, and that, they would not bring up the issue of camps or imprisonment of people, and then they started to do that when, I guess, the Iraq, invasion of Iraq or different situations came up. And so I realized, I still didn't quite realize, the depth of this until I think I understood the connection that this was not something that just happened by itself. It was part of a whole pattern of things that were happening. And so the cessation of guarantees of non-repetition were so key. And I don't think we understood how important that was. And so I think I've learned that. At the same time, I'm very proud of what we did. It's not to say that we didn't, we're not proud or that we didn't accomplish something. I think we did. The community is a lot stronger. We are an example of a group that won reparations, that gives inspiration to people. So that I think is, a good thing. But I think there's still a lot of things we can learn, and I think the learning is still going on.
Yeah. I think there's so many tenets of reparations that we've learned about that I don't know were present in the Japanese American Redress Movement. When you talk about cessation, guarantees of non-repetition, rehabilitation, restitution, we talk a lot about healing, that there cannot be repair without reckoning. There cannot be healing and repair without reckoning. And I've enjoyed actually hearing all of you who did organize during the movement reflect on that aspect and even talk about healing. There's more to be done on all fronts. I think that when we started to study very seriously, to form our committee on reparations, I think, we all had a sense that, we'd taken ethnic studies and, read lots of books. but really studying the history of the reparations movement was, and not just Japanese American reparations, but the fight for Black reparations. I think that then it was really about the study of the country, the study of the world, and really like deepening and expanding in that. So, I agree. I think that we're still constantly learning. And then we're starting to, learn more about land sovereignty, land back issues. It's just, I think, all of the tendrils of connection are ever more present.
And I think one important thing is that we didn't think things were possible. We were very limited, I think, in how we were looking at reparations in our battle. Because at the last testifier, not the last, June Kizu testified on behalf of NCRR, and she said some things in the video, but earlier she said things like, return our Issei, return our community, return all our dignity, and then she says, but we know that's not possible. And today I would say, let's talk about those possibilities. So I think that's what I've learned.
I would add a couple things. I think what struck me about my serving on the California Reparations Task Force is the connectedness of so many things. And I'm proud of our work in reopening the Coram Nobis cases, Korematsu, and some of the other things. But it's regrettable at the same time that history just continues to repeat itself. Just a block down before the Democracy Center next to the Japanese American National Museum, ICE was deployed, a couple months ago to round up, immigrants here, at the very place that Japanese Americans so long ago were assembled before they were taken away to concentration camps from the LA area. And we all, Japanese Americans, but everybody else should have our hair on fire in terms of this repetition intentionally. I mean, the people that deployed ICE were making a point about this. And the connections go to the past, whereas communities tend to sort of view their own predicament as maybe unique or focused on themselves and not so much how it might relate to everything else. Just give you an example. I'm talking to Mrs. Yayawada, who she's passed now, but she was among the 8,000 Bay Area Japanese Americans, including Fred Korematsu and my parents and many others, who were forced out of their homes and into Tanforan racetrack, and forced to live in horse stalls while these concentration camps were being constructed in different parts of the country. She didn't miss the irony that the toilets and the drinking fountains were marked with sign that said white and colored. In other words, Jim Crow had already seeped into California, and Japanese Americans suddenly thrust into that paradigm in which they neatly fit, because the whole idea of racial segregation, separating and excluding people out, sending the message of who's an American and who isn't, who belongs here and who doesn't, that was already there. And so that's what I meant, that our experience was just part of an ongoing story that actually began, a few centuries ago. So I think if we understand that, then when people say calling for a racial reckoning after the Floyd murder, I think that has greater meaning, that we need to go back to its origin, and it does come from a place. And I think that place is slavery, and also the way America has treated the original Americans on this soil.
Thank you all for that. I know we are actually very tight on time. I wonder if we can just squeeze in one quick question. Thank you all for being generous with your time. But just really quickly, I mean, we have several questions from the audience, and I will just mention, if we don't get to your question tonight, please do email us at info@densho.org, and we can get back to you in the coming days. But really just quick thoughts in a minute or two. We have a question, I'm not sure from whom, but how can we bring the redress struggle to the foreground and put it into the context of broader reparatory justice, especially when the Japanese American community is so used to thinking that history just means the World War II incarceration era? Any thoughts?
Well, I think people could read the book, NCRR, The Grassroots Struggle for Redress and Reparations. Go to Densho and look up a lot of the material around redress and reparations and the videos. And yeah, those are some of the things that people can do to learn about redress and reparations.
We have a book club right now. Nikkei Progressives has a book club literally studying this book. Yeah, there's many things. There's many things. There's
Yeah.
art. There's definitely pieces of art. I think that, you know, I guess I would say maybe to the person who posed that question, I would be so curious to hear, you know, your family story, your curiosity, and the way. I as an artist, I think a lot about silence and the breaking of it, and I think that on some level, almost everybody can identify with a sense of being different, a sense of being silenced, whether on a huge macro level or on a very personal level. And so, you know, I know that when we were working on a project together, and I'm just gonna say Tales of Clamor, I'll just say it. It's our play that we got to work together on. You know, that showed me again and again how many people, not even just Japanese American, but all kinds of bodies, ages, generations, have a resonance with the idea of being silenced. And so again, I go back to Alice, you know, and how no one benefits from the truth being silenced, and their attempts left and right to silence, right? So the redress movement, to me, I think about the commission hearings and the busting out of story and memory and the unleashing of that pain. And I think that those folks, their families, their descendants, our communities, we're still hearing these things. I just started to listen to the Chicago hearings that are also available online. You can listen to the Chicago hearings. You can watch the LA testimony online. And, you know, hearing the Chicago stories, completely different set of stories there, you know. So I think that there's a lot of ways for us to bring those stories out and spread these memories, this education, and have that be a part of our work.
Well, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we do need to wrap up. There's still so much to discuss, and I'm sorry that we didn't get to nearly, you know, any of these questions, but please do feel free to email us and we'll get back to you. And thank you so much again, all of you, for being here, and everyone watching. Without the redress movement, without all of you, Densho would not exist. And so we are very aware of that, and we really appreciate that. And yes, I hope that, you know, everyone was able to gain something from this program, whether that's, you know, new historical knowledge or a moving story, you know, a prominent thought or feeling, or maybe some, you know, hope and inspiration. But yes, just know that we'll continue to be here and do our best to keep safeguarding this history for generations to come. So thank you.